Whether it's long-forgotten unsolved crimes or identities lost in the confusion of historical battles, there are many unsolved historical mysteries that remain unsolved. Some of these might have answers that historians or archaeologists could one day uncover, while others will forever remain a mystery. Number 10. The United States lost 52 submarines during the Second World War. Only one of these was lost while on duty in the Atlantic Ocean. The USS Dorado vanished without a trace in October of 1943. What happened to it and where it remains today is an unsolved mystery. The USS Dorado was a Gato-class submarine, which was launched just 2 months before she disappeared. She was captained by Lieutenant Commander Earl Caffrey Schneider, an experienced veteran who would be taking control of his own submarine for the first time. The submarine left New London, Connecticut on October 6, 1943, and sailed south to the Panama Canal. The Dorado would pass through the Caribbean region, a heavily trafficked area of water. To make sure friendly aircraft and ships knew where she was, her scheduled coordinates were communicated to bases in the region ahead of time. A sanctuary corridor was set up, prohibiting aircraft from opening fire within a certain area around where the submarine was estimated to be. This included up to 50 nautical miles ahead of her estimated location and 100 nautical miles behind. The Dorado was expected in Panama on October 14th, but there was no sign of the boat. She had to be declared overdue, and searches were quickly launched to try to find her. There was no sign of any wreckage along the path the Dorado would have taken. Investigations soon revealed two disturbing possibilities. The first involved a U.S. aircraft that would have crossed paths with the Dorado on October 12th. The plane was escorting a convoy of ships that were expected to cross over the submarine. Sure enough, the crew spotted a submarine crossing perpendicular to the convoy's path. The crew knew of the Dorado and had its sanctuary zone plotted out, but this submarine was some 20 miles north of where that sanctuary zone began, and moving in a different direction from the Dorado. It was night when the plane and the submarine met. The crew tried to get a visual identification of the sub, but there wasn't enough light to say for certain what it was. It didn't look like any US submarine they had seen before, but it would later emerge that they were unfamiliar with modern subs. The plane opened fire on the submarine, dropping 2 depth charges and another device on the submarine. When they circled back, there was no sign of any wreckage or an oil slick. During the investigation, a devastating mistake was revealed. The plane crew had been working with the wrong coordinates. They had been within the Dorado's sanctuary zone when they dropped the devices, and were only 39 miles ahead of where the Dorado was estimated to be. But the investigation couldn't say for sure that the Dorado had been the victim of friendly fire. There was no wreckage, and the Dorado wasn't the only submarine operating in the region that night. The German submarine U-214 had also been in the area, laying mines at the entrance to the Panama Canal. The plane actually encountered the U-214 later that same night. The German submarine opened fire on the aircraft but didn't hit it. This wasn't the same submarine, and most accounts agree that the Dorado was the boat struck by the US plane that night. But it's possible this didn't do enough damage to sink the boat. Instead, some suspect that the boat survived the encounter, only to be sunk by a German mine. Number 9. Despite what his nickname might suggest, Ivar the Boneless was one of the fiercest rulers of the Viking Great Heathen Army that invaded the British Isles in 865. According to the Norse sagas, he was one of the sons of the famous Ragnar Lodbrok and was looked to as an advisor and leader, even among his famous brothers. Even though historians agree that Ivar was a real person, there remains a lot of mystery surrounding the actual events of his life. The sagas and stories about Ivar often contradict one another, and the Anglo-Saxon sources only confuse the matter further. But one of the biggest mysteries surrounding Ivar is where his strange nickname came from. The History Channel series Vikings offers one of the most popular explanations for the epithet. According to some of the legends, Ivar was cursed and born without bones in his legs, or with only cartilage where bones should be. Ivar's mother stopped his famous father from abandoning him as a child, and he grew up to be a skilled bowman and tactician who was taken into battle while carried on a shield. The story of a curse may be an explanation for a disability which Ivar was born with, such as a brittle bone disease, but many of the stories and depictions of Ivar show him as a strong and agile warrior who had no problems walking or supporting himself. In fact, in some sources, he's described as a berserker, someone who would go into an almost wild state while on the battlefield, focusing on nothing but attacking. Another theory to explain this mystery is that the phrase boneless was meant to reference a snake. It could refer to him being very flexible and agile on the battlefield. Many sources also describe Ivar as being very intelligent and calm under pressure, which might also have been represented by the snake-like imagery. A less popular theory is that the name was simply a transcribing error by a later writer. The word boneless in Latin is written as exos. This is very close to the word exosus, which means the hated. The hated seems like a much more natural nickname for a fierce Viking warrior who helped bring much of England and parts of Ireland under Viking control. If one scribe had misinterpreted the nickname and written it as exos, this might quickly be copied by later scribes until it was the most common interpretation. But this doesn't explain translations directly from Old Norse. There are no surviving manuscripts that preserve the hated nickname. One of the strangest parts of this mystery is that the boneless nickname only appears in later documents, written after Ivar passed away. This might suggest that whatever it was that inspired the epithet, it wasn't as significant until later, when legends started to be built around these important Viking figures. Number 8. On September 26, 1878, a specially equipped stagecoach arrived at a station in northeast Wyoming, packed with treasures belonging to a mining company. The coach was suddenly attacked by a gang of armed robbers. The coach should have been impenetrable, but the robbers made away with treasures worth millions of dollars in today's money. The robbery and the location of some of the treasures remain shrouded in mystery to this day. One of the key figures implemented in the robbery was an outlaw known as Lame Johnny. Lame Johnny had been born Cornelius Donahue. He walked with a pronounced limp, possibly due to an accident or from contracting polio as a child. He did well at school but decided to move to Texas to become a cowboy. Donahue wasn't successful and soon turned to horse thefts. It wasn't long before his crimes caught up with him, and Donahue decided to start a new life for himself. In the 1870s, he moved to South Dakota to prospect for gold. He changed his name to John Hurley and seemed to find some success, leading a law-abiding life. He worked as a bookkeeper from the Home State Mining Company, the largest mining operation in the Western Hemisphere. Unfortunately for him, though, he was recognized as the infamous Texas horse thief and had to abandon his work. He returned to his life of crime. It wasn't long after this that the stagecoach robbery took place. The stagecoach was specially outfitted by the Home State Mining Company for a weekly treasure run, bringing gold and other valuables out of South Dakota to Cheyenne. The coach was lined with steel, and portholes allowed armed guards to train their weapons on anyone who might try to break in. All these precautions couldn't stop the September 26th robbery. One of the guards lost his life in the firefight, and another was wounded. The robbers also suffered casualties, but most managed to get away, along with the treasure. Lame Johnny had experienced holding up stagecoaches, but he'd never done anything on this level before. Despite this, he became one of the suspects in the crime. It wasn't until July 1979 that Johnny was captured after a typical horse theft. He was transported to a local jail, then taken in a stagecoach to travel to Deadwood, South Dakota to stand trial. The authorities wanted to hold Johnny securely. He was shackled and handcuffed, and the shackles were bolted to a metal plate in the stagecoach's floor. The coach was escorted by experienced armed guards. It should have been impossible to break Johnny out, but once again the preparations were not enough. The stagecoach was stopped by an armed gang blocking the road. For some reason, the guards had slipped away and were nowhere to be seen. The gang made the driver throw his own weapon away and allow them onto the coach. They pulled the metal plate out of the coach and dragged Johnny away. At first, it seemed like this might have been a rescue, but it quickly became clear that wasn't the case. The men took Johnny's life on the side of the road and vanished without a trace. To this day, who exactly held up that coach remains a mystery. Number 7. One of the strangest mysteries of the Second World War concerns the fate of Leonid Kruev, who vanished while on a mission in 1943. Leonid was the son of Soviet politician and future leader Nikita Khrushchev. This connection didn't keep him out of combat duty when war came. In fact, the younger Khrushchev had no problems taking an order to go and fight in the Soviet-Finnish War. He trained as a pilot and completed many successful missions. Khrushchev would continue his service in the fight against the German invasion in Russia. In 1941, he was severely wounded in a plane crash and spent almost a year recovering. During that time, Khrushchev found himself in trouble after accidentally taking the life of a drunken sailor. The pair had been playing a game where Khrushchev tried to strike a bullet into a bottle on the sailor's head. The pilot was reprimanded but avoided any serious punishment, and instead he was sent back to the front lines. On March 11, 1943, Khrushchev became engaged in an air battle over the Kaluga region. His wingman, Senior Lieutenant V. Zamorin, made it back to base, but Khrushchev was not with him. Search teams were sent out to try to locate and hopefully rescue the missing pilot. There was no trace of Khrushchev or the plane he'd been piloting. In the years after the disappearance, Zamorin gave a few different stories about what happened to his fellow pilot. He first said that Khrushchev had heroically put his plane between Zamorin's and an enemy. The decision likely saved Zamorin's life, but Khrushchev's plane was struck by enemy fire and destroyed. In the second story, Zamorin claimed that Khrushchev had struggled with the controls of the plane and crashed. The final version of the story was simply that Zamorin had lost track of Khrushchev and had no idea what had happened to him. After Nikita Khrushchev passed away, Zamorin retracted his later statements, returning again to the story that Leonid Kruev had lost his life as a hero, putting his plane between Zamorin and enemy fire. Despite these mixed accounts, some suspect that something else entirely happened on the day Khrushchev disappeared. The theory goes that Khrushchev deliberately crashed in order to defect to Germany. The theory offers no explanations for why he would do this, but Khrushchev's wife was later arrested for espionage, and some suspect that this might have been related to his disappearance. According to the theory, Khrushchev was captured by Soviet forces in the closing stages of the war and brought back to Russia. As a traitor, he lost his life on the orders of Joseph Stalin. The theory is allegedly attested to by KGB agents who claim to have witnessed Nikita Khrushchev beg Stalin to spare his son's life. All records of these events were destroyed, but without any records or evidence, the theory remains unlikely. The younger Khrushchev had shown signs of wanting to defect. He'd been fighting for the Soviet Union for years and didn't need to be forced into combat. The most likely series of events is that Khrushchev lost his life in a dogfight against German planes, but without any remains, the truth will stay unknown. Number 6. On the night of November 12, 1972, a group of thieves broke into a small museum in southern France. They made off with paintings worth millions of dollars, and no trace of those paintings has ever been found. The Albert André Museum is a small museum, and in 1971, a donation by George and Adele Besson was added to the collection. The small museum now houses artworks by some of the most famous names in the art world, including Auguste Renoir and Claude Monet. Local news coverage of the Besson donation had attracted a lot of attention to the museum. The local authorities were worried about the dangers this might put the collection under. They did not have the facilities for significant security. There was only one single caretaker to look after the museum, and he had to follow guests from room to room to ensure the safety of the paintings. This would cause problems if the museum saw significant traffic. In November of 1972, a city council meeting addressed this topic. The only alarms at the museum were put on the door locks. The council agreed to install a new security system, which would be put in place the following month. Just days later, the theft took place. A caretaker discovered the theft at around 2 p.m. on November 13th. The thief, or thieves, had broken into the museum through the roof. It's believed they accessed the roof from a neighboring building, which housed a school, and was empty at night. After getting into the attic through a window, they cut through the ceiling of the gallery and lowered a rope ladder down. Once inside the gallery, they removed paintings from their frames. It's believed these were then rolled up for easy transportation. The thieves tried to get access to the Besson rooms, but the doors to this area were locked. Rather than forcing the door, the criminals abandoned this part of the plan and made their escape, back through the roof and the adjacent building. The police at the time could find no clues that would lead to the identity of the thieves or locating the paintings. Since then, the case has remained cold. It's believed that the thieves had some knowledge of the museum and the security measures that were going to be put into place the following month. It likely wasn't a coincidence they decided to commit the crime just after the council decision had been made. Number 5. Almost as soon as Christopher Columbus returned from his voyage to the New World, there were theories that he wasn't the first modern person from the Old World to have made contact. There have been many theories of pre-Columbian contact that have emerged over the centuries, from Chinese explorers to African fleets. One of the strangest, though, is that a group of fishermen made the voyage in the decades before Columbus. The Basques are a distinct people, originating in northwestern Spain and southwestern France. The Basque country sits on the Bay of Biscay, and it's in the waters where many of the Basque people of the 1400s worked. The Basque people were known as skilled fishermen and whalers, but competition from other fishermen pushed them further and further away from their home waters. By the time French explorer Jacques Cartier arrived in what is today Canada in the early 1500s, the Basques were already a familiar sight for the native population living on the Atlantic coast. Cartier wasn't the first European to discover that the Basque had beaten him to the New World. Even as early as 1497, John Cabot arrived off the coast of Newfoundland to find many Basque fishing vessels at work there. The North Atlantic coast of the Americas was home to some of the best fishing grounds in the world at that point, especially for cod. Whale pods would also spend the summer in the region, providing two lucrative sources of income to many Europeans who might make the trip across the Atlantic. As early explorers discovered, the Basques were making that trip, and doing so in secret. They didn't want anyone else to find out about the fishing grounds and attract competition to the area. It was a valid fear, as this was exactly what would happen in the centuries after the discovery. Sailors from England and Portugal and elsewhere in France and Spain pushed the Basques out of the region. But exactly how long the Basques had been making that trip across the Atlantic remains a mystery. There is some evidence for Basque settlements on the Canadian coast that date back to the early 1500s, but nothing from before the time of Columbus. That doesn't necessarily mean the fishermen weren't in the area earlier, as Cabot could attest to them being there at least as early as 1497. It's known that Columbus had Basque sailors with him on his maiden voyage to the New World. They were known as accomplished seafarers, and even if they knew nothing about what lay westwards, they would be valuable assets to any explorer. It's possible that these sailors returned home after the voyage and immediately told their neighbors about the New World. This may be why the Basques seem to have a head start on the exploration of the coasts of Canada. But some suggest that the reason Columbus took Basques was because they already had knowledge of what lay beyond the Atlantic. One piece of evidence for this theory is beaver pelts. English records from 1380 to 1433 showed Basque sailors traded unusually large quantities of beaver pelts during this time period. This was at a time when beavers were becoming increasingly scarce in the areas of Europe that the Basque had access to. These pelts were even allegedly wrapped in the same style as those of the people indigenous to eastern Canada. It could be that the Basques had simply found an untapped region of Europe that they kept hidden from the competition. But some suspect the beaver came from the New World. To this day, there's no concrete evidence that indicates when exactly the Basques first arrived in the New World, leaving the topic a mystery open to speculation. Number 4. During wartime, it's not uncommon for particularly dangerous enemy combatants to become almost legendary figures in the retellings of soldiers forced to face them on the battlefield. These legendary characters might have additional stories attached to their name, obscuring the truth about who they were and their actual actions on the field. In the confusion of war, the truth may be forgotten entirely, leaving only a few clues to piece together the reality. The Vietnam War was no exception. The use of guerrilla warfare by the Viet Cong made them even more terrifying to American soldiers, who were losing a war in an unfamiliar jungle to an enemy they couldn't even see. One of the legends to arise from that war was that of Apache. Apache was allegedly a female Viet Cong warrior who terrorized U.S. Marines around Hill 55, a Marine Corps base southwest of Da Nang. Everything we know about Apache comes from accounts of those same veterans, in particular, Carlos Hathcock, the man who claimed to have taken her life. This means that the truth about who she was beyond her alleged exploits in the Vietnam War remains a mystery that will likely never be solved. Apache was known as a skilled sniper and markswoman, but the true terror came when she was given captured U.S. soldiers to work with. She was allegedly particularly vindictive, committing brutal acts against the prisoners within earshot of their fellow soldiers. Apache would make sure her enemies could hear what she was doing to the soldier, focusing on maximizing pain rather than getting any useful information or quickly taking their life. Hathcock recounts one story where she was with a group of Marines who lost one of their number to Apache. Throughout the night, the group could hear the screams and cries of the captured man. The following morning, he stumbled into the camp, badly wounded and in an extremely disturbing state. He managed to make it out of the camp just before collapsing and succumbing to his wounds. This was the motivation Hathcock needed to put an end to her reign of terror. It took days to track down Apache and her group. Hathcock and his spotter waited in the jungle, watching them through scopes before Hathcock could get a clear aim on the female soldier. He took her out with just 2 bullets, while an artillery strike eliminated the rest of the group. Many people have cast doubt on this story, though. Who exactly Apache was remains a mystery. Her name is unknown. The nickname was given to her by U.S. soldiers due to the violence she inflicted on prisoners. There's no record of this skilled female soldier within the Viet Cong or North Vietnamese records. If she had existed, her exploits likely would have been used for propaganda purposes. The fact this didn't happen has made many believe she never even existed. Number 3. William Rufus, or William II, was the second Norman king of England and the son of William the Conqueror. In August of 1100, he passed away under mysterious circumstances that left historians questioning what really happened almost 1,000 years later. William was the 3rd son of his famous father and the 2nd oldest at the time of William I's passing. At the time, it wasn't uncommon for land to be split between surviving sons. All of the older king's sons had run-ins with their father during his reign, but William was allegedly his father's favorite. So when the conqueror passed away in 1087, his English crown was passed to William II. His oldest son Robert was made the Duke of Normandy. William and Robert had another living brother, Henry, but Henry only inherited money. William wasn't the most popular ruler in England, especially within the church. He raised taxes to fund campaigns along the Scottish and Welsh borders, and kept bishop seats open so he could collect income from their lands. As most of the chroniclers of the time were churchmen, it meant most of the contemporary writing didn't speak fondly of the second Norman monarch. According to later chronicles, there were many portents during the year 1100, with signs that something bad was coming for William. The most famous of these were 2 dreams that took place on the night of August 1st. William himself and a monk at a nearby monastery both had strange dreams that alluded to William meeting some dark fate. William is said to have dismissed the monk's dream, but was still concerned about his own. But he ultimately decided to go ahead with the hunt in the New Forest on August 2nd. The hunt took place after a dinner with some of William's nobles. He went out with a small party, which included his brother Henry, nobles Gilbert and Roger de Clare, and the de Clare's brother-in-law, Walter Tyrrell. While in the New Forest, the men separated. Tyrrell was allegedly one of the best huntsmen in the group, and he went with William. At some point, William spotted a deer and loosed an arrow at it. The deer survived, but he followed it, shielding his eyes from the setting sun. What happened next is unclear. The most common story is that William either instructed Tyrell to fire at the deer, or that Tyrell spotted another animal that had come between him and the king. Either way, Tyrell fired an arrow, which struck the king in the chest. William broke off the shaft of the arrow, but fell on his wound. He quickly passed away without any last words. When Tyrell saw that he couldn't save the king, he fled the scene. Not long after, Henry and the other nobles came across William's body. Rather than arranging for his brother's remains to be moved, Henry rushed back to Winchester to take control of the royal treasury, and then to London to be crowned king. He didn't even wait for an archbishop for the coronation, and had himself crowned by the Bishop of London. William's body was eventually discovered by peasants, who brought it back to Winchester Cathedral on the back of a cart. He was buried without much ceremony. Some have pointed to Henry's fast movements as a sign that there was more to William's passing than a simple accident. Some sources claim that William had agreed that his brother would be his heir if anything happened to him. Robert was away on the First Crusade at the time, but he was on his way home. If Henry were to plot to seize the throne from his brothers, it would be the easiest to do this before Robert came back to defend his claim. The hunting trip may have been his last opportunity. Tyrell fled to France and later told a priest that he wasn't the person responsible for taking William's life. Whether or not Tyrell was guilty, Henry allowed for his estate to be inherited by his children, rather than seizing it for the crown. While Henry's actions may seem suspicious today, there is little actual evidence that he knew what would happen on that fateful hunting trip. Hunting was a dangerous activity. Their older brother Richard had lost his life in a hunting accident in the New Forest 30 years earlier. It's just as likely this was just another tragic accident that coincidentally happened at just the right time for Henry. Number 2. The city of Hadrienopoulos was founded by the Roman Emperor Hadrian on the site of an even older ancient Greek settlement. It remained an important city for hundreds of years before suddenly being abandoned in the 7th century. Archaeologists are still trying to solve the mystery of why this happened. The ruins of Hadrienopoulos are located in modern-day Albania. A theater and temple have been identified, as well as what's believed to be one of the oldest churches ever discovered in the region. Hadrienopoulos is famous for its mosaics, which are among the best preserved of their kind. The location was first inhabited by the ancient Greeks in the 5th century BC. Its location at the point of 3 rivers made it an important trading hub and a stopping point on journeys between the east and the west. During Roman times, it became even more important. It was made the administrative hub of the region and was visited by Hadrian and other emperors. When the empire was split between east and west, Hadrienopoulos sat just on the eastern side of the border. It had always been an important military position, but now the split made it even more important. Hadrienopoulos continued to thrive until the late 4th century. For the next 100 years or so, the area was going through a crisis. The Western Roman Empire was under regular attack, causing problems on the other side of the border. But in the 6th century, Hadrienopoulos was restored under Emperor Justinian. It was even made the see of a bishop, solidifying its status as an important city once more. For another 100 years, the city of Hadrienopoulos remained a popular center, but at some point in the 7th century, it was suddenly abandoned. According to archaeologists, there was no sign of a gradual decline, as might be expected before a city is abandoned. It seemed like the residents all suddenly decided to leave for some unknown reason. The cause of this strange departure is a mystery that archaeologists are still trying to solve, but there are a few theories. The area is tectonically active, and one possibility is that a major earthquake or series of earthquakes prompted the evacuation. Alternatively, a significant fire could have destroyed the city, leaving behind ruins that nobody returned to. Both of these are plausible, but they would not explain why the city wasn't returned to afterward. The site had been the home of an important settlement for over 1,000 years at this point, and only a century earlier, its significance had been emphasized again. Normally, when a disaster destroys a city, people soon return and rebuild and start fresh. But this didn't happen to Hadrienopoulos. Number 1. After the Norman conquest of England, many of the Anglo-Saxon nobles lost land and titles to the French newcomers. Some settled into new roles in the new English court, while others looked elsewhere to start a new life for themselves. In particular, a group of self-exiled Anglo-Saxons may have set up a new home far to the east in a place they called Nova Anglia. Nova Anglia, Latin for New England, is a mysterious place today. The colony was attested to directly in only 2 medieval sources, written hundreds of years after it was formed. But other sources seem to back up the story, and there's enough evidence for many historians to say it existed, even if we don't know much of what it was like. The 2 main sources date to the 12th and 13th centuries and tell the story of a group of English nobles and their followers setting out in the 1070s. Immediately after the Norman conquest, there had been some hope that the Danish king would come to their aid. When that king passed away, they knew no help was coming. The group set out with a fleet of ships out into the Atlantic and through the Strait of Gibraltar to the Mediterranean. The sagas describe many adventures, capturing cities on the North African coast or on islands in the Mediterranean. The English then heard that Constantinople was under siege from what they called heathens. They traveled eastwards to the aid of the Byzantine Empire and broke the siege. After much fighting, they were able to push the invaders back. The Byzantine emperor was grateful and offered the English positions in the Varangian Guard. These were his personal bodyguards, made up of elite warriors who had no role in the local politics. Some of the English agreed to join the Guard, but others were hoping to find land of their own to rule over. The emperor couldn't take land from his own nobles, but there was another idea. He described a land to the north and east, across the Black Sea. It had once been under Byzantine control, but had since been taken over by heathens. If the Anglo-Saxons could take it back, they could settle there and rule it for themselves. The newcomers took up the challenge. The stories claim they traveled 6 days and 6 nights northeast, a distance which would have taken them from the Crimean Peninsula if leaving from Constantinople. Once again, there were many battles, but the English emerged victorious and set up Nova Anglia. According to 2 sources, they set up many towns and gave them the same names as English towns. They maintained their customs and language, remaining separate from other groups who were settled in the area. Nova Anglia remained on good terms with the Byzantine Empire, but did not convert to Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Much of the story does seem more legendary than historical. The exact name of the leader of the Anglo-Saxons differs, and historians haven't been able to identify which English noble he was supposed to be. The name of the Byzantine emperor is also incorrect. But there is other evidence that Nova Anglia may be true. Old navigational maps from the 14th to 16th centuries show place names on the Crimean Peninsula that resemble English towns. These include Sasako, which may be related to Sussex or Saxon, and Londina, resembling London. Long after the initial exile, English warriors were part of the Varangian Guard, making up a large portion of the force. They continued to speak English as their primary language, but there is no evidence they'd come from England itself. In the 13th century, Franciscan friars, traveling to speak to the Mongols on behalf of the Pope, also seemed to stumble across these out-of-place English. They described a group of people called the Saxi, a group of Christians who were able to hold off the Tartars. It seemed the Nova Anglia colony lasted hundreds of years. Unfortunately, they left behind no written records themselves, and no archaeological evidence has been found that helps historians to understand the people. It also remains a mystery just how and when the colony disappeared. Historians believe it was likely at the hands of the Tartars as they pushed westwards, but they may have simply eventually assimilated into other communities living on the peninsula. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.